Hey guys, welcome back to Art Theoriez. We're on a casual one this week. We've got a book review. It's been ages since I've done a book review and they're like something I enjoy doing. So this week we are reviewing Bruno Munari's Design as Art. But before we get into the book, let's learn a little bit about who Bruno Munari was, why he was important, and why you should care. Bruno Munari was an Italian artist, designer, and inventor. As a young man, he was associated with the Futurist movement and later something called concrete art. He was particularly interested in natural forms, kinetic art, and fracturing light. Pablo Picasso described Bruno Munari as the Leonardo of our time. Munari lectured at several universities, including Harvard, so he's kind of a big deal. And there's one thing about Bruno Munari I couldn't find out which I really wanted to know. Obviously, the Futurists got a little bit of a bad reputation after the Second World War because they were a bunch of fascists. I would quite like to know if Munari was a fascist, and I couldn't find anything online that told me either or. So if you know, if you have any sources, put that in the comment because I'm really, really interested to find this out. Anyway, I don't know, so I'm not going to judge him for it yet, but, you know, he was hanging out with a bunch of dubious people, so... Let's get into the book. Munari starts the book by acknowledging that art has completely changed in recent years. Remember, the book was written in 1966, so this is the decade of conceptual art, performance art. Painting had finally died and things were changing really quickly. And Munari admits that the old-fashioned categories of painting and sculpture are no longer capturing the public's imagination. And he's not necessarily seeing this as a good thing. He claims that the artists of the 60s, his time, were desperately trying to find ways to recapture the public's imagination. And they were using all sorts of new methods and materials to do so. But it wasn't working. The public ultimately don't care. According to Munari, this is because for a long time the art world had been actively trying to cut the public out, to create a closed circle between artists, dealers, critics, collectors, and galleries. They didn't actually want the public in. They wanted it to be an exclusive club for elites. And it's gotten so bad, it got to the point where the public didn't care, firstly, and even when artists did want to re-engage the public, they didn't know how. And Munari argues, since artists are no longer able to bridge the gap between culture and the public, designers are the perfect people to fulfill that role. Because, unlike artists, designers are modest. They're willing to listen to the needs of their communities. They're willing to find creative and rational solutions to actual real problems. Just want to point out, this is Bruno Munari's thoughts, not my own. I'm saying it like it's my own, but this is what Bruno Munari says in the book. Munari believes that instead of creating beautiful decorative objects that we can look at, which is basically what artists do, we should be infusing artistry into the everyday objects we create, which is basically what designers do. He states, there should be no such thing as art divorced from life, with beautiful things to look at and hideous things to use. Munari argues this is actually historically how artists worked. Greek vases were beautiful artworks, but they were also functional and had an everyday use. At some point in the history of Western art, we decided to stop making functional objects and start making decorative, useless, but pretty objects. According to Munari, design as we know it came about in 1919 with the birth of the Bauhaus school, whose founder, Walter Gropius, acknowledged that creativity and art could not be taught, but technical mastery of materials and processes could be taught. So he put the emphasis on technical skills, finding problems and finding solutions for them in a creative yet rational way, which responds to the needs of the community, which was quite different from the kind of art which was being made before, which was much more decorative and much more old-fashioned and traditional. Munari really vibes with the Bauhaus because he was also advocating for a kind of artist or creative who listens to the needs of society and actively responds to them. There is one little difference between the Bauhaus's understanding of art design and Munari's. That is that the Bauhaus was trying to kind of combine the category of artist and designer into one thing, whereas Munari seems to be advocating for designers to take over and replace a lot of things that artists were currently doing. So there's a little difference there, but minor. Munari claims that when the objects we use every day and the surroundings we live in become works of art, then we will finally be able to say that we have achieved a balanced life. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about the Bauhaus and its fascinating history, I do have a video on it, which you can check out. But I recommend you finish watching this video first and then go over to that video. So Munari seems to think that designers are like this amazing species of creatives who can solve a lot of the problems which the art world was facing at the time. But what is a designer anyway? Well, according to Munari, a designer is someone who can make useful things, but also has an aesthetic sense and can infuse artistry into what they make. This is different from, say, an engineer who's really good at making things but doesn't necessarily see the point or care about aesthetics. Designers understand that aesthetics have psychological value for the owner of a potential buyer of a product. This, for example, is why Apple products cost more than PC products. But this begs the question, what makes an object beautiful or aesthetically pleasing anyway? Well, according to Munari, it's something called formal coherence. And this is where each part of an object connects with the whole seamlessly, and the object is able to perform its function in total harmony. Munari uses the example of a leaf. A leaf is beautiful, yet it's not trying to be beautiful. It's not like beauty was added onto the leaf. The leaf is beautiful because every part of the leaf has a specific function, and the leaf as a whole performs its duties perfectly, so it has a formal coherence about it. I hope that makes sense. It's a bit of a hard one to explain, but I hope you kind of get what I'm saying there. Otherwise, forget about it. So yeah, Munari thinks that the role of the artist has changed a lot in the last couple of decades, from the 60s and the 50s, and he is right about that. And he views this with quite a lot of suspicion. He states that this changing role of the artist has allowed for a lot of fast ones to be pulled. And he's not wrong, but I also feel like he can only really see the negative stuff that was going on. But Munari advocates for kind of art to go back to its role in ancient societies, where art was given more explicit tasks, like communicate this information by making a painting about it, or make a pot which can be used for storing stuff. But why does he think designers are going to do a better job at this than artists? Well, according to Munari, this is because artists have A, de-skilled, and B, are completely disconnected from society, whereas designers have practical skills and are carefully listening to the needs of society. I don't think he's necessarily wrong there. Munari concludes his argument by saying, the designer is therefore the artist of today, not because he is a genius, but because he works in such a way as to re-establish connection between art and the public, because he has humility, and because he is able to respond to whatever demand is made on him by society. Okay, I've patiently sort of broken down this part of Munari's argument, and I've tried my best, I kind of failed, to keep my own opinions out of it. But now I'm just going to give you my opinions because I've got some, so I might as well share them. First of all, I'm going to admit that Munari gets a few key things right. The art world is out of touch and de-skilled, and the art world does actively try and exclude the public from its realm. However, I think that he misses something. The way I see it, the art world is a pile of trash. But in this pile of trash, there's these beautiful little gems of culture. And our job is to sieve through the trash to try and find these amazing gems of culture which we need to celebrate and feel inspired by. I think Munari in 1966 was looking at culture and all he could see was a pile of trash. He couldn't see the gems. And I don't think he was looking in all the right places, because the 1960s was the decade of conceptual art, of pop art, of fluxus, of performance art. Like, there was so much interesting stuff happening. Definitely wasn't functional, practical stuff. So it wasn't really the stuff he was interested in. But there was a lot of amazing creative projects going on at that time. And I don't necessarily think he was tuned into it, which is why in his pessimism, he was like, well, we might as well get artists to just make practical things really nicely, because people benefit from that, because artists aren't listening right now. And he was finding that frustrating. So, me and Bruno Munari, we've got our differences of opinion. That's completely fine. Still respect him. But yeah. Also, this argument of the book is about the first 30 pages. And I'd say that's the most interesting part of this book. The next 100 pages is a lot of waffle. And if you're not interested in specific design processes or materials or forms, it was just quite boring to read. So if I was you, I would read the first 30 pages, 40 pages maybe, and then I'd put the book down, because the last 50, 60, 70 pages is I could not wait to finish the book, but I felt like I had to read the whole thing in order to have the authority to talk about the book on a YouTube video. Let's just say the man likes to waffle. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate your support. Let me know, what art texts should I review next? Have a nice day.